What's a social physiological experiment you'd like to try on humans that would be considered highly unethical? There was a famous study on addiction in the late 70s called Rat Park, in which one group of rats was put in rat paradise with access to 2 water supplies, one laced with highly addictive drugs, the other just plain water, and a second group of rats each isolated in a small cage with the same water supplies. Doing this to 2 groups of people would be fascinating to see how addiction is affected and if it is inherently different between species, and whether intelligence plays an important role in its influence. This was on Reddit before, so it's not my idea. Drug a homeless person, wash him, cut hair and nails, put him in a house and have a woman wake him up in the morning. Then everyone pretends that he has an office job and a wife. Hang Photoshop photos of them all over the house. How would this play out? Another way is to kidnap random people and reassign them to different families in a similar fashion. Can this work with the use of drugs and brainwashing? Build a huge biodome with flora, fauna, bodies of water, glass roof for the sun to enter, simulated rain, etc., and place newborn babies in there with grown-ups to nurse the child for the first few years. But feed it no information about the world whatsoever, not even language. These people are just there to raise the child to about 4-5 years of age and ensure they are physically healthy and capable. Then leave these kids be and study their development into adults. I'd be interested to see if they make any higher power conclusions or form hatreds of any kind towards one another, how they develop genders and intellect and so on. You also need simulated wind, or the trees start sucking at being trees. Put the most content and non-confrontational people together with a tyrannical leader and see how far they have to be pushed in order to force a confrontation. Similarly, would the addition of more and more people lower or increase their tolerance for tyranny? I'd like to pair several newborns at birth with an African grey parrot companion, which lives 60+ years. Might be a breakthrough in human parrot communication. A buddy of mine wanted to raise a kid without ever eating chicken. Then give them chicken and ask what it tastes like. He wanted to know, since everything tastes like chicken, what would you describe things if you never had chicken? I could easily do this. My whole family went vegetarian when I was young. My little sister is 7 and has never eaten meat at all. Drop 400 one-armed babies into an island, well, place so they survive, and 41 armed adults and see how they build a society of one-armed people who don't believe they're disabled at all. My favorite part about this is that each adult is responsible for 10 babies. I have always wondered how it would work out if you had a child in some extremely remote portion of the world and raised them to believe it was still the 1800s or some other time in the past. You could deny them all other human contact, or maybe have your significant other in on it. Basically, just keep them away from any and all hints of modern society. Raise them this way until they are a young adult, 18ish. Then, one day tell your child that you have discovered a way to travel forward into the future. Get them entirely convinced for and enthusiastic about it. Drug them, drop them off in a major metropolitan area, and see the results. Alternatively, what if you and every other person only wore incredibly scary, inhuman masks while around your human baby? Never let it see anyone without the mask. One day, when it is old enough to talk, get rid of the masks, without letting the child see, and never again wear it. I want to see what would happen if we had a group of children raised with no taboos, perhaps even a few generations, to see what happens. Take a town. Make the rule that children cannot be told not to do something unless it hurts them or someone else. Being rude? Fine. Cussing? Okay. Running around naked? Whatever. Interrupting others? Do it. The harming themselves and others is mostly just to keep them alive. Make sure we don't get a Lord of the Flies situation, etc. What I want to find out is whether anything will actually become taboo. Will the children decide they always want to be clothed, like we are now? If so, will they clothe the same parts? Will any words become unmentionable? Will it be more or less acceptable to be different? To make this more fun, don't let them know this is an experiment, and let it go on for generations. The toughest part is that for the first generation, the parents can't give approval or disapproval for anything, or it will taint the study. My hypothesis is that everyone will end up wearing snuggly pajamas 24/7. I think clothing would happen pretty much anywhere it gets below 60°F/15°C at any time. You biologically need something to retain heat at those temperatures or you risk hypothermia or death. There's a reason pretty much all human cultures have clothing. Raise about 20 children up to the age of 14 but doing every single thing for them. At 14, they are transferred into a secluded abandoned city all alone. Except they have access to the internet. Watch them try to struggle and Google stuff like how to grow food and how to cook. I have a feeling you'd end up with 19 dead kids and one that miraculously survived. A group of people under constant influence of low dosages of LSD. I've only taken it once and it caused major shift in my day-to-day mood and thought process. I wonder what would happen if you were under the influence of it all of the time. Looking into the MK Ultra project. Thanks for the pointers, guys. I microdosed for about 45 days straight. I won't ever touch the stuff again, but it really changed many of my habits' motivations. Put a spacecraft into space with a death row inmate with all the resources she would need to survive for 25 years plus. Then send them directed away from our planet towards the emptiness of space. The twist is that they have full control over that spaceship with the ability to correct or change paths, orbits, and a stable internet connection that connects directly to Reddit to ask for advice on how to make it back to Earth. It'd be interesting to raise a group of people from birth with zero spoken language and see how they communicated when they got older and what the general effects would be. This already happened. Mute kids with no guidance developed their own sign language and eventually grammar, so chances are your group will develop their own language. Designate an island with no civilization comforts to dump people who commit high crimes like murder. Have a drop of rations once every 3-6 months. I'd like to see if they form a hierarchy to try and survive. It'd be interesting to see how they determine who gets to be in what position. Would they stick with murder? Probably. They'd probably found 4-5 cities around the perimeter of the island, then stay out of the middle for fear of being eaten by desert spiders. And rent would be freaking expensive. 100% surveillance with 100% access. Everyone in society is filmed. Everyone is required to have a body camera running at all times. Everyone over 18 has full access to all footage and may edit and distribute at will. I'm curious what fricking would become if verism were mandatory. I'm also curious how copyright and trade secrets would work. Finally, if it were really done without restrictions, I wonder what group would be corrupted or gain advantage in that society. That'd be mandatory exhibitionism, not verism. If we had to watch it all, nothing would ever get done. Interesting experiment though. I remember seeing this a long time ago here on Reddit, but it was one of those live-in reality TV shows. Gather a bunch of gay dudes and one straight dude, and have them all live together and vote every week to try and kick out the straight dude. Give a monetary prize that decreases for the gay guys and increases for the survivor as weeks go on. However, plot twist, they're all straight. Every single one. The show is just 15 straight guys pretending to each other that they are all gay. Nice. A bunch of straight guys fricking each other for no reason. I'm into it. Large scale trading places. Take all the assets from several thousand rich people and give them all to several thousand homeless people. Money, cars, homes, bank accounts, even jobs. What you would never be able to swap out is education, life experience, and work ethic. See who rises back to the top or slips back down to the bottom. Big factor here would be to select the self-made rich. I feel like there would be a massive difference in how an heiress and someone who started out middle class would respond to going riches to rags. I would like to raise two groups of children. Group A would be taught that being gay is the natural state. They would be raised by gays and be exposed to movies, books, etc. that include gayism in their storylines. Group B would be taught that being straight is the natural path. They will hear stories of boy-girl relationships, etc. and be socially conditioned to lean towards marriage with the opposite gender. Both groups will not hear condemnation of the other orientation. That is, they will be taught that the other orientation although not the most natural, is not bad. That there is nothing wrong with being a gay or straight from a moral standpoint. From the physical orientation of these children as they grow older, we will have a decent indication on whether a person's orientation can be conditioned. We will be able to tell if people can choose their orientation under the right influences and circumstances. 2. I'd add 2 more groups. One similar to group A but straight, never introduced nor addressed, and one similar to group B with no mention of gayism. It would be interesting to stick a baby, the younger the better, in a room with robot that fed it, changed it and communicated with the baby with binary beeps. As the baby grew up, would it learn binary as a language? How important is human contact for newborns if something else is providing for them? Maybe even have the robot a computer interface. How long before the kid uses it, understands it can access information, realizes that it isn't alone, etc. There have been experiments where babies were given complex stimulation but no direct human interaction. They always ended with brain damage. It's unlikely a new high-tech version of those experiments will yield a different result. Go to a sperm bank and get sperm from 5 different guys. Mix them all together and inject it into a woman. See whose baby you get. Make a TV show out of it and call it Sperm Wars. Get 2 people in a closed-off room with a gun loaded with blanks, to their knowledge loaded with live rounds. Have one handcuffed, caged, and tell the other one, who'll have direct access to the gun, that they can shoot the restrained one. If they don't shoot without prompt, you tell them that they did some kind of crime. Start off low, theft, then build up in seriousness, probably swapping out subjects. See what crime action will make the person shoot the other. Blanks are actually still dangerous at close range. You would probably want to go with fake bullets so it would look loaded if they checked, but nothing would go off if they pulled the trigger. Super duper illegal, unethical in the extreme, and something that should never be done under any circumstances, but an in-depth, comprehensive experiment into Stockholm Syndrome. Hundreds upon hundreds of combinations, with many different variables to test. Questions to be answered include, does having more people on either side increase or decrease the obedience of the victim? Does gender have an impact on it? What about socioeconomic background? Would a rich person be more obedient than a poor one? What about age? Could a child cause an adult to develop Stockholm Syndrome? How easily could the opposite happen? Would that be different to normal parenting? What effect does environment have? Would an outdoors living area be more effective than indoors? What about furniture? Does variety, quantity of food have an effect? Do different sources of entertainment for the victim increase obedience? Such a study could never be done outside of a computer simulation, and even then it would be freaking disgusting. But if there was any experiment that I would be interested in, the effects of it would be that. Have a gigantic metronome playing a subsonic tempo for the entire world, just loud enough that it can be felt on a subconscious level. Now that everyone's on the same tempo, we can see if there are fewer car accidents, less incidents of people bumping into each other, and generally less human sync issues. That'd be amazing, unless the metronome suddenly stops working. I don't think I'd want to be involved with the experiment in any way, but I read a post once in a not too different Reddit thread, where someone said chimps and humans are genetically speaking close enough to produce viable offspring. If so, I'm curious however to see what the result would be. What could it do? How smart would it be? Would we still call it human? Would it be able to continue making offspring, or would it be a Liger mule type situation? Before you judge me, you asked for highly unethical OP. I find it hard to believe this hasn't been done. Someone must have tried that. Isolate someone from birth to any environmental influence and see if they understand the difference between good, evil, and moral right, wrong in different subjects, such as murder or stealing. Take a group of people, 30 or 40 of average health from each race, like on the self-id forms, just white, black, Asian, Latino, Native American. Set them up in their own little bubble. Think Stephen King's Under the Dome without the smog and access to fresh food, water, but only preventative medical care and basic first aid. What does that society look like in 100 years, 200 years? Do they have lower than average rates of cancer, asthma, food allergies, mental illness? How did the different races respond to the same conditions? After all that time, Are there still separate races? Do religious beliefs breakdown of followers still follow the rest of the world's trend? I would imagine that after a while the population would all start to look the same in terms of physical features and skin color. Biologically all humans are 99% similar, so I don't think that different races would react in different ways besides their already held cultural beliefs. Raise a bunch of children from infancy in a concrete bunker far away from civilization. No interactions with other humans, in person or through media. Periodically release gendered and non-gendered objects into the bunker, like clothes or toys or random stuff, say a clock. Other than the fact that they'd all be antisocial weirdos like the cloth mother wire mother monkeys, I'd be curious if they'd end up with the same ideas of gender. Girls like pink and babies. Boys like cars and the color blue. That we do. I've had people tell me that girl babies are innately attracted to faces and boy infants are innately attracted to cars. But I'd want a group with as little opportunity for bias, even unintentional subconscious bias, as possible. The pink-blue thing definitely won't happen. That's socially based. It used to be pink was for boys and blue was for girls. It changed somewhere around World War II. I want to have two groups of babies, with one raised by an institution and the other raised by their natural families. I want to see if raising children with a structured environment without parents and with the sole goal of producing productive, healthy, educated, and compassionate people would succeed compared to traditional methods. The traditional family group would be selected from financially and mentally stable ranges of families. This is mostly to see if a society could regulate and refine the child raising process to produce the most productive and ideal of citizens. My vault experiment. Each Tuesday a random room fills up with water once a month in this underground vault of thousands of people. The rooms are random, but as well as the days. One day would be on the 4th, so now it has to wait until the 1st of the next month before it can randomly trigger, meaning it could go off on the 1st, 8th, etc. But one room is safe, a small one-man room or closet. I would want to see if the people thought there was a pattern, and how they decide on who goes in the safe room. Not highly unethical, but I do want to know more specifics about how gender affects learning in school environments. I'd like to have a few classes consisting of high school age boys and girls, and include people who are trans. Let the classes study a certain material for 3 months, and monitor how people perform in school. Then after 3 months, separate all the girls into one group, boys into the other. Let those groups be separate classes and continue learning the material for 3 more months. I want to know which group ends up with the best worst grades, and if the grouping into gender-based classes affect how they learn. I also want to know if the trans kids would behave differently in a gender-segregated environment, given that they were probably socialized as a different gender for quite a while before their transition. Just compare with highly segregated societies like Iran. My guess is that it won't affect academic performance and trans kids will transition earlier due to the increased stress and pressure from segregation. Raising a child from a tribe that is primitive in the United States and seeing how they compare to children from generations of education. Assign female to natal males, assign male to natal females. See how many people end up wanting to switch back to the gender which would be most commonly associated with their natal gender. I'm not sure what outcome would be the most interesting. Here. Political scientist here. Get 4 small provinces with equal size and resources. Fill them with random people in a manner that makes them statistically uniform. Implant authoritarian communism in one, anarcho-socialism in another, authoritarian capitalism in another, and anarcho-capitalism in the last. Isolate them and watch. If any of them survive 40 years, destroy the isolation and let them interact. Most likely the anarchic ones will have developed some kind of government, otherwise they'll just become breakfast for the authoritarians. Make it a TV show. Raise boys and girls in separate groups. Raise them with absolutely no knowledge of the existence of the other sex. Completely. Not even the idea of 2 genders in other animals. Sometime after puberty expose them to each other. How would they react? Would they recognize each other as human? Would they be attracted to each other? If they were, would they be able to figure out what fricking is and how to do it? Would they move to each other's villages? How would that affect their social order? Would a patriarchal, matriarchal or equal society emerge? could give interesting insights to human nature removed from social biases and the extent of our instincts toward the opposite gender versus learned behavior. You guys ever see the movie Martyrs? Something of that style. Sensory deprivation. Complete isolation. See what happens after years. A parenting test for every person capable of reproduction that if failed would result in temporal sterilization. You can try again in 5 years. If you want to reproduce, it would last 5100 years and the goal is to find out if less humans make for a better life for everybody. Somehow I'm sure most people would fail the parenting test. Place a children in complete isolation at birth. Make a lot of people come and go to his place to take care of him, talk to him, play with him. The catch is, the place is rigged with stuff to make the kid think everybody can use telekinesis. Make the kid think this is common and everybody can do it. What if there is the slightest chance that he actually developed the real thing because he has absolutely nothing to believe he can't do it? It's super unethical, but here goes. Force anyone who accepts any form of financial aid, welfare, unemployment, food stamps, subsidized housing, etc. to also take a form of contraceptive that lasts 3-5 years. The theory being if you can't afford your current situation you don't need to bring another child into it. What happens to populations? What happens to crime rates? Does this incentivize people to get out of social programs and demonstrate that stability to have a family? Would any changes lead to unexpected benefits deficiencies elsewhere? It would be fascinating to have a city do this for at least a generation to see its full effect. Have children raised into adulthood without learning language in order to see how many generations it would take for a complex language to be formed. This experiment would most likely take hundreds of years, but it would be so interesting to see the results. Actual randomized controlled trials of all the observational nutrition studies. Control fat, sugar, carbs, etc. from birth to death. Ever since I took a psychology course in both high school and in my freshman year of college, I've always been interested in the human behavior studies portion of psychology. I would constantly think of what could be studied if ethics weren't an issue. The one I've always thought was this. It's similar to the Stanley Milgram experiment. One person is the teacher and the other is the student. The student will be played by two different people, a child and a man. Obviously, both would be actors. One group of people will be given the child to test, and another will get the man. From here, it'll be the same as the Milgram experiment. I also came up with various variations to test different things. Variation 1. Both groups don't see their students and just ask the questions, and shock them. Variation 2. The teachers do meet their student, even spend a little time with them before they begin the test. Test to see how people would react to shocking someone they had spent some time with. Variation 3. Both groups don't meet the student beforehand, but as they administer the test, they have an audio and video link to the student. They will see and hear the person going through the pain. Wondered if they would be willingly to continue if they can not only hear, but see the pain. The same would be for the child student. Again, they would be actors, so there wouldn't be any real pain. Variation 4. For the group that would be administering the test to the male student, they would be told beforehand that the man is a convicted criminal rapist, pedophile, etc. This would test whether people would or wouldn't show sympathy to someone they were told was a criminal. Variation 5. Same as variation 4, but at the end, it would be discovered that the man that was believed to be a criminal was actually a normal person. They wouldn't have any audio and visual links to the student while the test was being administered. Variation 6. Same as variation 5, but it would be discovered that it was actually the child they were testing on, and not the criminal. I could go on, but I think I'll stop it here. Again, this was something I've always thought about. Always curious how people would react to various situations. I know this was very disturbing post, but I'm sure the same can be said about the Milgram and Stanford prison experiments. Yet, it's because of those, we can better understand the human psyche and behavior. My wife wants to sterilize men and women who are irresponsible parents. So woman with 2-3 kids, no job, no more kids. Dad who doesn't support kids. Snip snip. Sounds great on paper, but OMG. There was an organization that did something similar to this, called CRACK. They offered free permanent BC, and I think about $400, to drug addicted women with kids. It got a lot of backlash, but if I recall correctly was pretty successful. If a child was raised from birth with its only communication and interaction being with an isolated AI would be an interesting one. How much information the child can have access to can decide it, but the main point of the test would be to see how a human raised by an AI would function through its life. Or more importantly, we can observe how an AI will operate under such conditions and if any perceivable change is present throughout time. I know this is a super duper unethical one, and I'm almost hesitant to even post it online, but I'm genuinely curious about what would happen if you introduced testosterone or estrogen to children early on, like pubescent levels at 5 or 6 years of age. This was something that ate at me when I was going through puberty myself, and it's such a weird thing to be curious about, but for whatever reason, it really ate at me. Funnily enough, this was used as a concept in Rick and Morty. Put a toxic couple in an enclosed chamber, record each person's thoughts about the other prior to starting the experiment, and then play it when they are actually in the same room. Keep both of them in opposite corners. In each corner will be a table with a white flag, a pair of boxing gloves, and a megaphone. Leave the couple in the chamber until both use the white flag. I want to clone Neanderthals and other extinct species of human. See if they had any intellectual abilities modern man doesn't. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.